Emergency update on AMD stock. Where is the stock headed next? We're going to dive into the most recent news, what's kind of going on in the semiconductor sector, and then look into the charts to figure out where this price could be headed next. I'm Chill Deal Trade. I use my 12 years of experience to help you succeed in the markets. The first thing, let's just hop into kind of an overview. There's a deep dive video if you want to understand the intricacies of AMD and why they have so much potential in the long run as a company. Go watch that long. I'll have it as a little click in the top corner of the video somewhere. So go watch that first. This is just an update video. So the first thing I want to hit is even though AMD has had a really big pullback, right? Like it was at 250 back at the beginning of 2024. It looks like maybe bottom out at 95. And now we've had this little short squeeze higher. The main thing we need to understand about AMD is where there's some vulnerability is the current PE is 110, but the forward PE is 17. The reason we're seeing such a big gap is because AMD has said that they're going to grow by really large numbers in their profitability and their revenue. So even though revenue might be the low teens or mid-teens or high teens, it was very general on their earnings call. We talk about that in the long form video. If this company does not deliver in their Q1 earnings that will be coming up in the next month or so, then this forward PE is going to rise. That's how forward PE works. It looks in the future based on the earnings that we're expecting. And if they don't hit those earnings, then this PE will rise. And we'll see what is a 17 now, might be a 25, might be a 30, if they are way off on what they're projecting for their profitability in the company. So that's the biggest vulnerability. But if they do hit their numbers, and this is the greatest strength, that if the market's always looking at the future for a stock after this really big pullback, down, it peaked above 220, pulled back all the way to 100, it's over 100% retracement from the highs. If they do continue to hit their numbers, which I don't know about Q1, but for the full year, I feel very optimistic for AMD, unless, a crazy, bear recession happens or something, a bear market or recession, then I do like this business at a 17 forward PE because it's something that they can grow into as a business, and 17 is just purely too cheap for this company, even after this big push higher. So that's a vulnerability, but also an opportunity. Let's go into some more recent news. Before we go there, go check out my Patreon. I have a free membership on Patreon where I upload a monthly watch list on the stocks that I'm paying attention to. It will be an updated list every month. I'll upload it on here. I also have a $5 membership. Just support the channel, which would be so awesome. If you support, it gets, the quality of the videos will get better. I'll make videos more often. That will just help the channel a ton. And at the $5 membership, you do get a monthly specific watch list of stocks that I'm keeping an eye on. Going into some more recent news, I think we had some really negative news, or I would say some more hype around negative news is these tariffs, right? So the administration and Trump, the president, has talked about how they are going to tighten export controls on anything related to AI, which is semiconductors, with our chips, which are, anything related to data center. They're going to continue to tighten export controls on China as a country. This is a big deal because I would say there's two big countries in the race for the leader in AI. It's the US and it's China. And so knowing that a lot of these chip companies are going to rely on China, potentially importing their chips or their hardware, putting larger restrictions could have an impact on the revenue potentially in the short term. We know the revenue is growing substantially for these companies. We know that they're expanding. I personally believe that we are in a AI super cycle with robotics and with everything that's going to come from that, which at the source will still be chips, which I think the demand will only pick up for the next couple years before we topple out. But tightening exports, at least in the short term, over the next 6 months, could have an impact, which, as the market always looks forward looking, it's going to create a lot of uncertainty around AMD and really the sector entirely. And so that's just something we really need to pay attention to see kind of like how that evolves. We know April 2nd is a big day where Trump and the administration are going to kind of highlight their more built-out tariff structure for the U.S. So this is probably the biggest vulnerability of, depending how much tightening goes on here. For example, 50 more Chinese entities on the blacklist. I think they said 100, I think is total or something like that. And so this is a big deal, as it could start to have short-term impacts on revenue growth, which when Q1 comes out or Q2 and we see a slowdown, this will impact the stock prices. Another thing, Malaysia tightening semiconductor regulations because of U.S. pressures, right? The U.S. is using their tariffs as a way to pressure other countries into helping, whatever the U.S. wants to achieve. And so again, these are big deals of the reason AI and chips has been made so much progress so quickly is because of globalization and low tariffs. And so if those things too are expand, they will impact it at some rate. Another thing is power semiconductors giant lays off 9,000 plus people. So this said that layoffs as market slows and China emerges. So this is something we want to pay attention to. Even though I feel like there's still a long-term bull case for semiconductors, we do need to pay attention to what's happening on the ground. And so we need to see, are people using less chips to produce the same? Our company is going to cut their data center growth. We just saw something out from Microsoft that they're cutting their data center growth. And so will this continue after the MAG saying we are going to spend millions and millions of dollars to build out our AI, our data centers, our capacity? Are we going to start seeing cuts or not? And so those are two things we're going to pay attention to. How are tariffs going to impact, and potentially are we going to see some cuts from the investment into AI? Those are two really, really important, I would say, the biggest vulnerability for semiconductor stocks. Let's look a little bit at kind of insider buying or institutional buying happening or selling. And right now, the main thing we're seeing, it's a really mixed bag. So you see some buying in the last couple of days into strength, which is a little interesting. But then you see like positions declining. You see some close of positions. You see some increase or new positions. Same thing here. Like 71% is pretty decent for institutional ownership. More buying, or about flat on buying and selling over the last 12 months. And you can look at it, maybe a little bit more buying than selling, but a big selling Q4. And it's kind of a mix more recently as well. Like, okay, there's a big close, $36 million close. That's, selling into strength is typically not a great sign. But maybe you have some newer small position, and you have a decrease of position. You have an increase of position. So it's a little back and forth and doesn't really tell us much. It does tell us there's a lot of uncertainty in the market. And there's people who have a really big bullish case, and there's people who have a really bearish case. Before we get into the charts, another stock I'm keeping an eye on is Marvell Technologies. They're a company that is growing at pretty decent rates. They've had a huge sell-off, right? Like, this company is down over 50% from the highs. Seems like it's trying to find a base here. So this is another stock I'm keeping an eye on, as I do like their forward PE around the same levels as AMD. But this company, as of late at least, is having a higher growth rate than AMD currently. Less profitable, but a higher growth rate. So this is another stock I'm keeping an eye on. Before we get into AMD, I actually want to look at the semiconductors ETF, because this is going to tell us a lot about where potentially the industry as a group is heading. And so the first thing, we talk about this on the weekly videos. If you're not following the channel, please do. We make Friday weekly videos typically, kind of reviewing the markets. I'll be doing one on Sunday this week, so just subscribe to the channel. We've kind of talked about, we have this range that we're trading in. We touch the bottom of the range and we've come back up. Then we have this extended range around the 200 level. On the weekly chart, let's go to the weekly real quick just to show it as an update for everybody. 20 days curling down. We haven't come back up to it, but what just happened? We have the 100-day down here. 100 days increasing or improving, which is good. We didn't come down and test it, but we do have this long-term trend line from 2022 that I just believe we're going to hit at some point. And so that is really steering the semiconductors holistically. I won't go into AMD and chart to figure out what could happen. But if we come here and, we get some rejection potentially, we have the 50-day starting to try to flatten out or curl over. We have the 20-day about the same. The 20-day is curling over more, starting to get more negative, which typically means, like potential negative. So we have long-term trend lines up, short-term trend lines starting to curl. So we're going to see, does it come in, test the down slope, the underside of this trend line, right? Like, do we come up and then get rejected, hit the line, and then maybe we can start, seeing a long-term uptrend again? We're going to want to pay attention to SMH because this is really going to steer the semiconductors holistically. But AMD could have slightly a different path, mostly because it's sold off so much and we're seeing some adjustments in the charts. So the first thing I want to highlight is weeks ago, we covered the stock, I think earlier this month or last month. We kind of drew that this has been in this downtrend, testing the top side and coming down and testing the bottom side of this triangle, and now we've broken out. And the reason why there was so much volume in terms of buying pressure is because this is a really long downtrend. Typically when you break it up down, you get a lot of pressure to the buy. We do have a candle that's peaking out on the weekly. If we get a big tail up here that's close to the 20-day on the weekly and we can't break above it, then again, like, what do we see? What do we talk about on this channel? The 20-day is momentum. So anytime we get above, if we break back below, that's bearish. If we come up and test it and come back below, that's bearish. So the weekly, we haven't seen a whole lot of substantial change outside of this downwards triangle breakout. And so something that I would really want to see is we gapped up here. At the minimum, come back to around the 108, 107. If we can close this, I'm calling this either a cup and handle. Let's go to the daily to take a little bit better picture here. And we also see some differences on the SMAs. So we either have cup and handle, or we have an upside down head and shoulders, and we could see a breakdown if we hit support here. This, I'll just call it 108 to 107. Let's put another trend line so that we have this for the future. You see these bottom candles here. So we'll call it 108 to 107 range. We really need to hold that. If we can hold that for a cup and handle to not break the pattern, it can't go down more than 50% of the cup. So if we call the cup at the top 115 and the bottom, that's 20 points. So we can't go down more than 10 points. If we go down more than 10 points, then we're breaking the cup and handle. And so we can't go down to more than 105. So we don't want this to go down to more than about 105, which when we look at this chart, right, like where's 105, we'll just call it here. That's about the mid of the cup, right? So that's a really big support. So we could come back down into what I'll call this really big support range. But if we do, we need to hold. That's the absolute bottom that we can see on this cup. But for a head and shoulders, we could come down a little bit lower, right? Like if we come down in that range and curl back up, typically for a cup, head and shoulders, the size of the cup is the move. So if it's a 20-point move and the top is 1, then we have 20 points on here. So 20 points higher than 116 is 135. Where do we see 135? Oh, to no surprise, a very important resistance line. What else do we see? Let's just kind of put out some things. Say it's a head and shoulders and it moves higher, right? Look what else we have at about 135-ish. We have this long-term trend line. So we still have some very negative pressure on downward trend lines, but we did break out of some important short-term trend lines. So we could still see some buying pressure in the intermediate term if this breaks out of the cup and handle formation or the reverse head and shoulders. So there's things we're going to want to pay attention to. We are seeing some improvement. Whenever you see kind of like accumulation at the bottom of just call it a U shape, that's typically a lot of accumulation, which is a positive. A lot of people are buying. And when we zoom out, we also see that there's just a lot of past support in that range. These two candles right here, right? Like, look at this. This is such important past liquidity. And so we saw a lot of people buying in that liquidity range and then power through. And so I would say we really need to hold 105. That would be my bullish, is we need to hold and stay above 105 in the worst case. And I would say we're probably put a floor in AMD unless we get, a bear market or something happening. But I would say there's a high probability we put in the floor. One of the reasons we're above the 20-day on the daily. So what happens when we stay above? If we can stay above the 20-day, but if we get above the 20-day, break back below, then the stock is headed lower. So that's what we're going to pay attention to. When we look at the 50, we're above the 50-day. We're testing the 50-day range. So that's important. If we can stay above the 20 and 50, then this chart is improving substantially. We still have the 100-day and the 200-day declining. So those are more powerful trend lines because they're longer lasting, right? But we are above two trend lines, and the 100-day and the 200 are declining. And so the 100-day 121, which is a really important now resistance line. We talked about that in the past. And then 200, which in the future will probably be around the 130s, the 135, which is the range we just talked about. That's going to be important. But those are declining. The other ones are currently flat or slightly, potentially can start curling up. And so now we're in a battle, short-term SMAs versus long-term SMAs. And it's really, honestly, it's all going to be determined on this range. If we can see, look at that, beautiful. If we can break above the 115, then we're definitely heading to the 130-ish range that could extend out through the summer months. And then we'll see what the market has to do from there. Do we get more bullish at that point? We'll be past Q1. We'll maybe get some 2Q guidance. And if so, then that's really, really positive for AMD. So those are some things to look out for. I'm still bullish long-term AMD. I think it's been overly punished because they did really bad guidance, but they're turning things around. They're growing a lot of partnerships. They're finding their area of expertise in the AI and data center revolution. And so this is a stock to watch. Let's succeed together. Let me know your thoughts. Until next time.